I discovered why US presidents won't talk about UFOs. And even now, I can't shake the feeling that everything I knew about our government was a carefully woven lie. It all started late one night when I came across a box of classified documents in a restricted section of an old military archive, a place I was never supposed to be, let alone snooping around after hours. I'd been told countless times that rumors about extraterrestrial contacts were just that, tall tales with no credible evidence. But these papers, dusty and yellowed with age, showed me something so unsettling that I couldn't look away. As I flipped through the pages under the flicker of a single emergency light, I found references to names I recognized, names of people in power during different presidential administrations, and they all pointed to a decades-old cover-up. My heart pounded, and I remember asking myself, am I really seeing this, or is my mind playing tricks on me? For years, I'd believed the official stance that UFO sightings were usually hoaxes or misunderstandings. But in that moment, my faith in the standard narrative cracked. These documents weren't vague rumors. They detailed real incidents, complete with footage logs and eyewitness accounts. I even recognized certain dates associated with declassified CIA reports that the public had dismissed as inconclusive. My first instinct was to doubt my own eyes, but the evidence felt too real, too damning to ignore. I always thought the notion of UFO secrecy was overblown. After all, the official story around the 1947 Roswell incident claimed it was just a weather balloon. Yet even back then, there were whispers of wreckage bearing unfamiliar symbols, whispers that never quite faded away, no matter how many debunking articles circulated. Like most people, I chalked it up to paranoia or sensationalism. Now I held physical proof in my hands that seemed to undermine every public statement made over the years. The blatant contradictions between these hidden records and the sanitized versions we've been fed only fueled my need to dig deeper. Inside that lonely corridor, the air felt oddly stale, as if nobody had breathed it in decades. A distant humming sound, possibly from ancient electrical wiring, reverberated through the concrete walls. My flashlight beam revealed dusty footprints leading to a locked door, and I couldn't help but notice that they weren't mine. Who else had been here? And why were they so cautious about leaving any trace of themselves? The hallway's fluorescent bulb flickered like it was on its last gasp of life, casting wavering shadows that made me jump at every corner. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild, but something about that place felt off. It was as though the very architecture was trying to keep secrets buried in its cracks. I remember running my fingers over a faded government seal on the binder's cover, the edges worn smooth from years of being handled in secret. There was a single symbol stamped on the first page, a small triangular shape etched into the corner like a warning. Officially, that shape meant nothing I could recall from standard government paperwork, but its presence sent a shiver through me. Why would they mark a file with an unidentified emblem unless it signified something extraordinary? Even more chilling was the mention of multiple presidential briefings over the decades: Johnson, Nixon, Carter, Reagan, all the way to more recent administrations, each labeled with cryptic code words indicating covert meetings or field visits. What truly rattled me, though, was a short audio transcript dated from the mid-1970s. The text referenced an unknown craft retrieved from a remote desert site and alluded to biological specimens that defied conventional understanding. I felt a jolt of dread and fascination. Could these documents be describing actual alien life forms? If so, why had every president since then refused to breathe a word of it? Conflicting lines in the transcript suggested multiple government agencies worked on hush-hush research, while official press releases had assured the public that nothing unusual was ever found. Even in my growing unease, I tried to ground myself in rational explanations. Perhaps the biological specimens were just experimental technology, or maybe the references to unknown crafts were classified military projects. Still, a nagging voice in my head insisted that too many details matched what conspiracy theorists had claimed for years. Was it possible they'd been right all along? The question clawed at my sanity. I had to get out of there before someone noticed I was poking around. As I carefully replaced the binder on the shelf, a flash of movement caught my eye at the end of the hallway. For an instant, it looked like a faint silhouette, human, but standing unnaturally still. My flashlight flickered, and the figure vanished before I could properly see it. I felt my heart thudding so loudly I feared it might give me away. My palms were slick with sweat, and the stale air somehow grew denser, as if pressing in around me. Something about the entire situation told me I was stepping into dangerous territory. If even a fraction of those documents were legitimate, then a powerful force must be working around the clock to keep these facts hidden. The question, of course, was how far they'd go to protect their secrets, and whether I was ready to find out. All I knew for certain was that I couldn't turn a blind eye to what I'd discovered. Leaving that archive felt like closing the door on my old life, the one where I trusted the official word without question. I reached the exit and glanced back one last time. A distant clatter echoed somewhere behind the rows of shelves, like metal scraping against concrete. I froze, half expecting to see that silhouette watching me again. I realized right then that the story I'd believed in, the one where UFOs were the stuff of folklore, had just unraveled at my feet. When a voice suddenly hissed my name through the musty darkness, I knew nothing would ever be the same. I thought I'd found the smoking gun when I pulled back a loose panel on that rusted metal door and discovered the console hidden behind it. Rows of tiny, blinking lights greeted me, and there was an unmistakable, low-pitched hum reverberating in the stale air. For a heart-stopping moment, I believed I'd uncovered the source of all those cryptic documents, concrete proof that the government was monitoring something far beyond conventional military projects. The console's display flickered with what looked like coordinates and lines of data, each one coded in a language or script I'd never seen. My pulse quickened as I realized this could be the direct link between alien contact and the highest offices in the nation. Yet, just as my mind began reeling with excitement, the lights flickered off, leaving the corridor in a sudden, suffocating darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my breath coming in shallow gasps. When I switched it on, the console was dead. No lights, no sound, nothing to prove I hadn't imagined the entire thing. The only sign that it had ever functioned was the faint warmth emanating from its surface. At first, I thought maybe it was a simple power failure, but the more I stared at the silent panel, the more convinced I became that something or someone had deliberately shut it down to hide what it contained. How could they know I was here? I murmured under my breath, shining my flashlight in every direction, half expecting a guard to step out and detain me. But no one came. As I tried to reason through the possibilities, I recalled the footprints I'd seen in the hallway the previous night. The sense that someone might be following my every move gnawed at me. For a moment, I was tempted to tear open the console, rip out its circuitry, and run off with it as evidence. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm and look for more clues. Was this console truly alien technology, or just an advanced piece of classified equipment? The design looked too sleek, too unearthly, yet I had to admit it might be part of some undisclosed research project. After all, rumors have circulated for decades that the government reverse-engineered alleged spacecraft from Roswell onward. Could I be staring at a fragment of that forbidden legacy? A disconcerting beep cut through the silence, followed by another flicker of light from the console. My hand trembled as I raised the flashlight. That's when a small screen lit up, displaying what looked like a distorted map, accompanied by a single pulsating dot. My heart thudded so loudly in my ears that I almost missed the faint squeak of a door hinge behind me. I whirled around, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The corridor was empty, or so it seemed. As adrenaline surged, I realized the beep had stopped, and the console was once again as lifeless as the old machinery in this abandoned facility. I refused to believe it was simply a glitch. Something was controlling that device, responding to my presence, maybe even tracking my movements. My mind raced back to those long-forgotten briefings in the documents, references to on-site equipment that was never explained in any official record. It felt like a massive puzzle piece had fallen into place, only for me to realize the puzzle was far larger than I'd anticipated. If presidents truly knew about this, had they authorized secret surveillance installations like this one to remain active across the country? The very thought sent a chill down my spine. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that nothing was as it seemed, and every discovery was just one rung on a ladder leading into darkness. I hurried along the corridor, checking each door I passed. Some were locked, while others opened into rooms stripped bare of any trace of furniture or files. In one room, I noticed a faded government seal on the wall, partially scraped off, as if someone wanted to erase any indication of its origin. A peculiar odor of burnt chemicals lingered in the air. Strewn across the floor were papers charred at the edges, their text obliterated except for a few fragments hinting at quarantine procedures. Part of me wanted to piece them together, but instinct told me to keep moving. Behind another door, I found a small laboratory-like space. Rusty metal tables bore scratch marks, and overhead lamps dangled from the ceiling, their cords frayed. There were metal restraints on the tables, the kind used to hold down something or someone in place. My stomach turned as I imagined what might have been strapped there and the disturbing experiments that could have occurred. Suddenly, a thunderous slam echoed from the hallway, making me jump. Heart pounding, I raced out to investigate, but only saw the distant flicker of a light before it too vanished. I was growing increasingly aware of my isolation, how the silence in the corridor felt far heavier than it should. Every step I took seemed to betray me, scuffing echoes along the walls. The further I went, the more I sensed eyes on me, eyes that melted into the dark whenever I tried to catch them. Clutching my flashlight like a lifeline, I pressed on, determined to learn what was hidden beyond these decaying walls. If presidents truly remained tight-lipped about UFOs, it wasn't just to avoid public hysteria. There was a far more menacing reason behind it all. A sudden clang from a vent overhead sent my nerves on edge. It sounded almost alive, like something metallic crawling through the ducts. I froze, unsure whether to investigate or turn back, but my curiosity overrode my fear. I managed only a few steps forward when a faint voice crackled through a speaker I hadn't even noticed in the ceiling. It spoke my name, soft, distorted, and unmistakable. Any illusions I had about this being a routine recon mission shattered in an instant. With dread crawling up my spine, I realized the console in that hidden room was just a fraction of the secrets lurking here. This was bigger, more ominous, and far beyond anything I'd prepared myself to face. And with that voice echoing in the stale air, I understood the horrifying truth. I was in far deeper than I'd ever imagined. I barely slept after fleeing that eerie corridor. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard echoes of my own name crackling over a hidden speaker. By dawn, my gut told me I wasn't just trespassing on abandoned property anymore. I was wedged inside a secret conflict that spanned beyond military confines. As soon as I stepped outside, I spotted fresh tire tracks in the dirt road leading away from the base. Whoever had been watching me the night before had either left in a hurry or wanted me to see they'd been there. The worst part was feeling like I had no one to trust, no one to call who wouldn't dismiss me as paranoid. Yet later that morning, I gathered enough courage to confide in an old friend, a retired intelligence officer named Colonel Briggs. He'd once worked on classified projects decades ago, so if anyone could help me make sense of that console and those bizarre files, it was him. He listened intently as I stammered through my account, occasionally nodding but never interrupting. Finally, he asked, "Have you ever heard of Project Blue Book?" Of course I had. Most people with even a passing interest in UFOs knew it was the Air Force's official investigation into unexplained aerial phenomena. But Briggs insisted the public side of Blue Book was just a cover for something far deeper, a labyrinth of hidden programs designed to keep certain findings out of the light. Briggs admitted he'd seen glimpses of data referring to non-terrestrial materials, though they were always heavily redacted or referenced in codenames. Seeing me shiver, he lowered his voice. I'm retired now, but my clearance stays on the radar. If you're nosing around in what I think you are, you'd better brace yourself. People disappear when they push too far. His words made my stomach tighten. I remembered that strange console, the vanishing footprints, the voice that whispered my name. It was as if someone was trying to warn me or intimidate me into quitting. My mind raced with conflicting theories. Maybe all this was a covert government experiment, or maybe those references to alien craft were literal. Either way, the sheer scale of the cover-up was impossible to ignore. Returning to the abandoned facility at sunset, I half expected armed agents to be lurking in the shadows. Instead, I found the building just as deserted as before, but the door I'd tampered with was now sealed shut. Inside, the corridors seemed darker, the lights dimmer. A heavy hush hung in the air, broken only by a sporadic electrical crackle overhead. My every footstep seemed amplified, echoing down the cement halls. I nearly jumped out of my skin when I glimpsed a scuttling figure slip around a corner, but by the time I reached that spot, no one was there. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that I was being guided along a specific path, like a rat in a maze. My search led me into a cramped office where half the ceiling tiles had been removed, revealing tangled wires overhead. A single flickering monitor was mounted on the wall, displaying a looping weather radar image of the region. Oddly, it indicated a pattern of repeating meteor showers, but the dates and times were all scrambled. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a small collection of taped cassettes labeled MK Ultra Spillover. My pulse quickened at the mention of the infamous mind control program. Why were they stored here, in a place linked to potential extraterrestrial secrets? It didn't make sense, unless multiple covert projects had intersected in ways the public was never meant to discover. A sudden crash outside the office made me drop the cassette I was holding. For a split second, I stood frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then adrenaline kicked in, and I dashed toward the noise. Down the hallway, I discovered a door that had been forced open, its hinges clinging to splinters of wood. Beyond it lay a room full of rusted metal cabinets, every one of them toppled as if someone had been searching in a frenzy. Papers littered the floor, including typed transcripts with black bars redacting most of the text. In the midst of the mess, I spotted a newspaper clipping referencing an unexplained disappearance on this very base in the late 1970s. According to the brief article, a group of technicians vanished during a routine test, and no official cause was ever provided. My blood ran cold as I scanned the scraps for more details, but every page abruptly ended in thick black lines. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered, then died. Darkness rushed in. The silence felt suffocating, like the building itself was holding its breath. That's when a frantic scraping sound resonated through the walls. It started near the ceiling, then moved down toward the floor, as if something was sliding along the pipes and ducts in search of a way out or a way in. I flicked on my flashlight, its beam shaking with my unsteady hands. I was trapped in blackness with God only knows what lurking just beyond my narrow circle of light. Desperate and terrified, I edged backward, fumbling for an exit. My mind spun with questions. Who or what was behind these experiments? Was all this evidence planted as a trap? Or was I on the brink of exposing a generational conspiracy no president dared reveal? A loud thud echoed from behind the cabinets, prompting me to shine my flashlight in that direction. I caught a glimpse of something moving, a shape that was neither quite human nor entirely alien. Before I could process it, the creature darted behind a stack of upended file boxes. My stomach clenched in raw fear, and my instincts screamed for me to run. But before I could decide whether to stay or flee, the lights flickered back on, revealing an empty room. No sign of that shape at all. In the harsh fluorescence, every cabinet and paper looked deceptively ordinary, almost mocking my fear. Still, I knew what I saw. Heart pounding, I started to inch forward, half dreading what I might find. That was when a door at the far end slammed shut on its own, locking with a decisive click. My only path back to safety had been cut off, leaving me to confront a threat I could hardly begin to understand. My lungs burned as I forced my way down the narrow corridor, heart hammering like a drum. The moment that door slammed shut behind me, every instinct screamed that I'd walked into a trap. With no choice but to move forward, I found myself in a dim, windowless chamber where a single overhead light sputtered weakly. On the far side of the room, a reinforced glass partition flickered to life, revealing a cramped observation area. What I saw beyond it obliterated any lingering hope that this might be some run-of-the-mill secret project. Two metal tables stood side by side, each with thick restraints dangling off the edges. One was empty, the other held a small, grotesque form, something that looked vaguely humanoid but clearly wasn't. Its limbs were too thin, its skin a mottled gray. Wires attached to its skull connected to machines that emitted faint beeps. My mind reeled, attempting to process what lay before me. This wasn't just evidence of extraterrestrial existence. It was undeniable proof that our government had been experimenting on beings from another world. And given the advanced age of the equipment, they'd been doing it for decades. The overhead light flickered again, casting harsh shadows across the remains. In that moment, my thoughts flooded with every rumor I'd ever heard about crashed UFOs and hush-hush autopsies. Part of me wanted to believe this was an elaborate hoax, a grotesque mannequin designed to scare off trespassers. But the stench of chemicals and decaying tissue told a different story. I felt sick, grappling with the realization that multiple presidents must have known. Perhaps they had authorized these experiments to glean new technologies or keep them from foreign powers. If that was the case, then everything we'd been told about unexplained sightings, weather balloons, illusions, was a willful lie to mask the exploitation of something far beyond our understanding. As I stared, a final whimper crackled through the speakers overhead, and a trembling voice reached my ears. "You've seen too much." I spun around, scanning the room in a panic. A silhouetted figure stood behind the glass, partially hidden by the dim light. The voice continued, distorted, yet resolute. "We tried to warn you off. This research is imperative to national security. The world can't handle the truth." My pulse surged with rage and horror. In a single breath, I realized they weren't just performing experiments. They were safeguarding a horrifying bargain. Perhaps the technology gleaned from these creatures was woven into our defense systems, or maybe the captives were used as bargaining chips with an unseen alien power. I had no way of knowing the full scope. All I knew was that it was colossal and sanctioned from the highest levels. The light surged, bathing the room in sudden brightness. I squinted, scrambling for any cover as the lock behind me clicked open. I could see shapes milling just outside, a security team, or perhaps something even more ominous. My every nerve screamed to flee, yet I knew if I ran, I'd never get answers. Summoning my courage, I shouted, "How far does this go? How many presidents have signed off on this?" My voice echoed emptily in the sterile chamber, met only by silence and the humming of electricity. A panel slid open in the wall, revealing a corridor lined with fluorescent bulbs that buzzed like angry insects. I hesitated, trying to decide whether to stand my ground or see where this new path led. Then the silhouette's voice returned, crackling through unseen speakers. "Walk away now, or risk igniting chaos our country can't afford." My throat tightened. Walk away? After witnessing this abomination? My outrage flared, but so did a profound dread. If the government had been complicit for so many decades, countless powerful figures were invested in ensuring people like me remained silent, or simply vanished. My mind swung from fury to desperation. I pictured entire administrations turning a blind eye for the sake of technological advantage. The potential ramifications spiraled through my thoughts. Wars fought with alien-inspired weaponry, deals brokered behind closed doors, and unspeakable experiments on living entities. Every question I had led to an even darker possibility. My hands shook as I realized the vastness of the lie. how entire generations had believed carefully curated denials while strange craft roamed our skies. In a burst of resolve, I hurled a metal stool against the glass partition, causing it to crack. An alarm blared instantly, drenching the hallway in an ominous red glow. Doors began to slam in rapid succession outside, trapping me inside the complex. I spotted at least 2 uniformed figures sprinting toward the observation window with weapons drawn. A wave of raw panic coursed through me, yet I refused to succumb to fear. If I was going to escape alive, I had to expose this, or die trying. Suddenly, the building rumbled, as though a giant engine had roared to life beneath us. Lights sputtered, and an automated voice announced an imminent lockdown. Searing anxiety knotted my gut. Who or what had triggered such a drastic measure? A burst of static screamed through the speakers, then died. In the silence that followed, I heard a scraping sound on the other side of the room, reminding me of the monstrosity strapped to that table. The sight of it, flickering in and out of the emergency lighting, reminded me just how big this conspiracy was. I realized I'd finally uncovered a piece of the truth, but the price might be my life. In that moment, it became clear there was so much more lurking beneath the surface. Even with this staggering revelation, something told me the real horror had yet to be unveiled. And as the sirens blared and the complex rattled, I couldn't help but wonder if the worst threat wasn't the creatures themselves, but the men who'd dared to play God with them. As the alarms wailed throughout the complex, I managed to slip away amidst the chaos, stumbling through back corridors until I found an unguarded exit. The night air hit me like a blast of icy relief, but I felt no real comfort, only a relentless pounding in my chest, echoing the horrors I'd just witnessed. By the time I reached my car, every nerve in my body screamed at me to drive as far from that forsaken facility as I could. Yet, even as I turned the key in the ignition, a hollow ache formed in my stomach. I knew I could never truly escape what I'd seen. Driving down a deserted highway under the faint glow of moonlight, my thoughts spun with the final, staggering revelation I'd uncovered in that underground lab. For generations, our leaders had not merely hidden the existence of extraterrestrial life. They had effectively collaborated with unknown forces, leveraging alien technology and engaging in unspeakable experiments. The carefully orchestrated illusions, the cover stories about weather balloons and top-secret military tests, served to mask a much deeper entanglement. Every time a president stepped into office, they inherited this ancient pact that bound them to silence. In every press conference or public statement, they had to dismiss rumors of UFOs, all while keeping the real truth locked away in fortified bunkers and laboratories scattered across the country. I found myself pulling over to the side of the road, hands trembling on the steering wheel, eyes stinging with tears of shock and rage. How many times had I watched news segments mocking UFO enthusiasts or read articles labeling believers as gullible? How many times had rational scientists insisted there was no credible evidence? Now I knew the missing piece was never about finding evidence. Plenty existed, sealed behind vaults accessible only to a chosen few. The public scorn, the official denials, the discrediting of whistleblowers were all part of a grand strategy to keep these cosmic truths locked away. Through the windshield, I watched the sky, half expecting more strange lights or an unmarked helicopter to appear overhead. My heart wouldn't stop racing. In one sense, I felt vindicated. The conspiracies were real, and I had glimpsed them firsthand. But the weight of this knowledge pressed down on my soul like an iron anchor. If these secrets were to be exposed to the world, the political and social order might unravel overnight. Entire institutions would lose their credibility, and panic could spread like wildfire. Whether from fear of mass hysteria or from deeper, more insidious motives, those in power would do anything to prevent that collapse. When I finally mustered the will to drive again, I realized my phone was vibrating in the passenger seat. The caller ID was blocked. Against my better judgment, I answered, only to be met with staticky silence, followed by a curt, metallic voice warning me to forget what I'd seen. Then the line went dead. Although it lasted only seconds, the message was crystal clear. They knew who I was, and they wanted me to keep quiet. Suddenly, every passing car felt like a potential tail. Every flash of headlights made my pulse spike. A new kind of paranoia latched onto me, a gnawing sense that my life would never return to normal. In the days that followed, I began noticing small but telling signs. An unfamiliar SUV parked on my street at odd hours, a faint click on my landline whenever I picked up. Once, I spotted a face in the crowd that looked disturbingly familiar, one of the security men I'd glimpsed behind the glass. Sleep became impossible. Night after night, I'd awaken to the slightest noise outside, my mind conjuring the image of that restrained alien form hooked up to sinister machines. In my darkest hours, I wrestled with the moral dilemma of blowing the lid off this operation. Could I risk it, knowing the panic and danger it might unleash on an unsuspecting world? And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I understood why each president has chosen the path of silence. The grand conspiracy is so interwoven into our defense infrastructure, our economy, and global relations that a public disclosure might trigger a complete collapse. Maybe they believe humanity isn't ready to face beings from beyond our understanding. Or perhaps the secret deals brokered behind closed doors are so perilous that unveiling them would spark something far worse than mere panic. Still, one question continues to haunt me. If even our most powerful leaders are afraid to speak, what else remains unseen beneath the surface of our reality? My discoveries have shown me just how fragile our accepted version of the world truly is. And though I've shared the barest fraction of what I found, I can't shake the feeling that I've only grazed the edges of an unfathomable darkness, an abyss of cosmic truths that could reshape human destiny in ways we can scarcely imagine. I leave you with this final thought. Every knock at my door, every late-night phone call, every unsettling glance from a stranger now reminds me of the secrecy that binds our world's greatest powers. I understand the cost of exposing these truths. Perhaps it's a price too high to pay. But if the silence persists, how many more hidden pacts, silent sacrifices, and lost lives will remain forever unacknowledged? That, I suppose, is the real question, and I fear the answer may be more frightening than any of us are ready to face. Hello, agents. Curious about the most famous and shocking UFO cases? My new ebook uncovers 51 encounters the government tried to hide. Find it in the pinned comment. And if you enjoyed these stories, make sure to subscribe. And there's another one waiting for you right here.